after I was leaving the Gary Moore show, I signed a contract with CBS for 10 years. And there was a clause in the contract that has never been before and certainly won't be afterwards, that if within the first 5 years of the show, if I wanted to do a 31-hour shows on television, variety shows, they had to put it on whether they wanted to or not. Well, I said, I'll never want to do that. I can't be a host of a variety. I never thought it. So 5 years were coming up, and it was the last week that clause could work, the 5th year. And my husband and I just put a down payment on a house in Beverly Hills, and I had a baby, 2 babies, and we said, maybe we ought to push that button. So picked up the phone and called New York, and I got one of the vice presidents of CBS on the phone. I said, Merry Christmas, Carol. Happy New Year. And it was that week. I said, well, I'm calling because I want to push that button. And he said, what? What button? And I said, where I can do. And he said, oh, well, let me get back to you. So I'm sure he got a lot of lawyers out of Christmas parties that night, called me back the next day, and he said, oh, yeah, I see, Carol, well, variety, it's a man's game. It's Gleason, it's Milton Berle, it's Sid Caesar, it's Dean Martin. He says, it was you gals. It's not for, we've got this great sitcom we'd love you to do called Here's Agnes. Can you just picture it? Here's Agnes. I can just see it now. And I said, no, variety's what I love. Music. I want a rep company like Sid Caesar had. I want dancers. I want singers. I want guest stars. I want to do sketches. I want to do different characters. And they had to put it on. And they didn't want to. And they thought we would bomb. I didn't know if all I knew was we had 30 shows, pay or play. And then it was 11 years. I don't like the term second banana. That's a term used as someone who supports the, quote, star. Ours was a true rep company. There were no second bananas. There were sketches that we did where Harvey would shine, where Tim would shine, where I would shine, where Vicky would shine. So it was a rep company. Gary Moore, when I was on his show way back, he used to open the show, but not tape it, not be on tape, but he would warm up the audience by doing Q&A. And I heard him, he was just wonderful with it. So when I was going to do my show, it was suggested not to get one of the, those guys who come out and tell jokes and warm up the audience before you start to tape, but come out so that the audience sees me as I really am before I start, putting on a fat suit and blacking out my teeth and with the wigs and the different characters, but be Carol and do Q&A. But then they suggested taping it. And I was a little worried about that, again, because I wouldn't know. And I didn't want to plant. I didn't want anything that I would know because I wanted it to be off the cuff. And if I had egg on my face, that's the way it would be. So the first show, I went out and I said, any questions? And first of all, I was afraid nobody would ask anything, and then I was afraid they would. But it started to catch on after we were on for about 3 or 4 weeks, and people came ready, to ask questions and do things. So it became a lot of fun because it was total improv. But the audience was my partner. The whole show wasn't created on the spot, but that part was. And then I insisted that we keep taping because we had a studio audience here. I didn't want to keep them waiting because, again, they're our partner and they feed us with their laughter. So if they're bored sitting there waiting for costume changes and scenery changes, we're going to lose them. So I used to have a bet with the stagehands that I could do a skin-out change. That's strip down, get changed, put a wig on, change makeup, everything, before they could change the scenery and move it up. So we did it like as if it were a live show. So if something would go crazy, we kept it in. Unless the scenery fell down and knocked one of us out, but that's why sometimes, Tim would go off on a roll and poor Harvey we didn't know what Tim was going to do. So we just rolled with it. See, that's so many of us who did our show came from live theater. So it was like, okay, you got to really be thinking on your feet. So, and just go with it. The audience loves it when something like that happens. Although Harvey and we prided ourselves on being trained theatrically, but there were times you just couldn't. It was like giggling in church or the library. I go out and I do questions and answers on the road. I go to different venues, theaters, so forth and so on. And I don't get up and do a one-woman show. I throw it open to the audience. So they ask me questions. I don't know what they're going to ask. It's all random. Nothing is prepared. So I really have to, the old gray matter has to be ticking. That is being in the now. You can't be thinking about tomorrow or yesterday if somebody's asking a question and you've got to come up with an answer. And when an answer lands, when I get a good laugh or a response out of it, again, that's that high. It is a little terrifying because I'm only as good as the audience. So sometimes if they're just kind of sitting there or just not really asking fun questions, I have to tap dance around, and I have developed certain stories as a result of some of the questions I've been asked about Tim Conway and Harvey and Vicki Lawrence and so forth. So I can bring it back to that to kind of stir them up. But sometimes I get, the weirdest question I ever got was a few years ago in Texas, many years ago. So remember that many years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I was in Texas, and a lady in pink up in the balcony was raising her hand. I said, yeah. She said, Carol, if you could be a member of the opposite sex for 24 hours and then pop back into being yourself again, who would you be and what would you do? I thought, oh my. Oh. And the audience started to titter and laugh. And I said, okay, God, to myself, I don't know what I'm going to open my mouth, and whatever comes out, God, it's going to be your fault. I swear, I opened my mouth, and what came out was, I'd be Osama bin Laden, and I'd kill myself. So I said, thank you, God. My parents in San Antonio moved to Hollywood, California to follow a dream. My mother wanted to be a journalist, a writer, and interview movie stars like Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper did. So they came out here. And then I stayed with my grandmother in San Antonio. At the time, then my parents got divorced. And so I just hung in there with my grandmother. And I remember we were on the WPA at that time. It meant that we were poor. And every week, somebody would show up and give us a chicken to fry, and also with hand-me-down clothes for me to wear. And it was fine, but everybody, it was the Depression. So everyone we knew on our street and in the block and the area, we were all in the same boat. So it wasn't like I felt deprived. We ate, and I had clothes, and I went to school. She was a hypochondriacal Christian Scientist. She was a character. She loved me more than anything, and she was my rock. And I found out years later that she had been married 6 times, but she only told me about 3. I was writing a book, and I did some research, and boy, I found out she was quite the swinger. But she was, we went to the Christian Science church, and I went to the Christian Science Sunday school, but my grandmother was always complaining about her heart skipping beats, and that, she didn't know if she was going to live another day. and so in Christian Science, you are supposed to, what they call, know the truth. And the truth is there is no sickness, there is no death, there is no. But so I would be talking about, as a kid, she'd be feeling her pulse and everything, and I would be knowing the truth for her. And then if I didn't know the truth well enough, she would ask me to get the medicine for her. So that's what I mean, a hypochondriacal Christian Scientist. But that's who she was. My dad was an alcoholic from the get-go, from high school on. But he was like a drunk Jimmy Stewart. Sweet. There was never a nasty, mean bone, and he just had that disease. And the kindest, most loving man I had ever known. My mother became an alcoholic a few years later. And then my grandmother and I moved out to Hollywood to be with my mother. And we moved in the same building, and she was down the hall, and Nanny and I had a one-room pull-down bed apartment right facing the lobby of the building. So I'd see my mother, and her dreams were shattered. She never really made it. She did get to interview a few of the people. So I remember she had an interview she freelanced for a while with Bob Hope, with Rita Hayworth, George Montgomery, people like that. But she never could hold down a job, and she was frustrated, and she started drinking. And but when she was sober, she was a lot of fun. She was beautiful. And my dad was handsome, and they made a gorgeous couple. And they were still friendly after the divorce. And but I remember Mama coming down the hall, and Nanny and Mama and I would sit in this little kitchen, and Mama would play the ukulele, and we'd sing. And she had a great ear for music, and she could do harmony so I would take the lead, Nanny would do the third part harmony, and Mama would do the intricate stuff. As a kid, I was very quiet. At times, my grandmother and my mother would argue a lot, and it was usually over money and liquor, because we had no money. Again, we were on welfare. What they called in Hollywood, it was called relief. And so we really would, we just waited from not paycheck to paycheck, but when the relief lady would come and give us some money for the next month. I would sit in the corner when Nanny and Mama would be arguing, and I would draw. I thought maybe I wanted to be a cartoonist and have my own comic strip, and I created a family that I would draw about, and they were called the Josephsons. My dad's name was Jody, so it featured the mother, who was Josephine, the father, who was Joseph, the teenage daughter, who was Jody, her kid brother, who was Joey, and their dog was Jojo. And I drew this family that was perfect. And that was my fantasy, to have this with a picket fence, and And but then when I got to junior high and high school, Mama said, "Look, you should write. No matter what you look like, you can always write." And so I got into journalism, and I was editor of my high school paper and also my junior high school paper. And I thought, well, I'm going to major in journalism when I go to college. But that fell by the wayside. So as far as being, I was raised going to the movies with Nanny. We would save our money And we would see sometimes 6 to 8 movies a week, double features, second round. And we'd go in and beat the prices, as Nanny would say. If we got in before 12 noon or 6 o'clock, it would be less. And in the movies, I lost all reality. That was my fantasy. And the good guys made it and the bad guys didn't. And so I grew up never being cynical because the movies were they weren't as edgy as they are now, So, I mean, okay, Mickey and Judy would go put on a show and they'd wind up on Broadway and it would all be beautiful and wonderful. In grammar school, Mrs. Ernst, I loved her. She looked like Katherine Grayson. She was so beautiful. And she was funny. And every Friday, if we had been good all week, in the afternoon, she would read a novel to us and act out all the parts. So I think maybe subconsciously, again, that was in there. I remember she read The Yearling to us, and she read all the parts, even the little boy, Jody. There was a Mr. Thorpe, who was my journalism teacher in Hollywood High. He was tough. Nobody liked him, but I kind of did. There was nothing. I mean, I got the idea when I was in high school that I should, as editor, interview famous people who went to Hollywood High, shades of my mother. So I got an interview with Joel McCrea, who was a movie star at the time, and I went to see him and wrote about him in the Hollywood High School News. And then I had one all set up with Lana Turner, and she'd gone there maybe for 10 minutes, and then the principal said, you can't cut school to go do that. But Lana Turner was later on my show, so it's all these movie stars, But Mr. Thorpe, he liked how I wrote, and he encouraged me to write a comedy column for the paper, which was anonymous. It was called The Roving Eye by a 10th grader, and nobody knew who wrote it. And I wrote it in all lowercase letters. I wanted to go to college, and I had good grades in high school, and I had enough good grades to get me into UCLA. And Nanny said, we can't afford it. Our rent was $30 a month. She had a fit when they raised it to $1 a day. And the tuition at that time, back in the covered wagon days, was $43. We didn't have the money. She said, well, now you should go to Woodbury College, a secretarial school, so you can become a secretary and then someday nab the boss. Yeah, she always said, you're only as good as the guy you marry, So that's why she did 6 times. Anyway, I said, no, I know I'm going to go to UCLA. I knew it. I saw myself on campus. It wasn't that I was hoping for it or wishing or praying. I said, no, it's going to happen. I just don't know how. Well, this one morning, it was my chore when I got up in the morning to look out into the lobby. Our room faced the lobby, and there were these pigeonhole mailboxes. And I could tell if we had a letter in one of those, and I'd run out in my robe, and this one morning there was a letter in our slot. I got it. It had my name typewritten on it, an address, and it even had a stamp, but it hadn't been mailed. It hadn't been canceled. Somebody had just stamped it and put it in the mailbox. I opened it up, and out came a $50 bill. I swear to this day, I don't know who gave it to me. Nobody we knew had that kind of money. My grandmother didn't, or she would have said, look what I'm doing for you. Nobody in our building, everybody was on relief. That was my tuition. So I got to go to UCLA. So I wanted to major in journalism. But I got there and there was no school, no major for journalism, but I took a journalism class and I joined the Daily Bruin. So I was looking through all the books and the catalogs and stuff, and there was a major called Theater Arts English, which meant I could take the playwriting courses and so forth. So I made that my major. And in doing so, as a freshman, if you majored in theater arts, English, or anything, you had to take an acting course, 1A. You had to take scenery, you had to take costumes, you had to take lighting, you had to take sound, and all the English courses and everything else. So I had to take this acting course. And I got into it, and I was terrified. So I picked a scene to do with one of my classmates that I thought would be easy, and we did it. And it was a comedy scene, and I heard the laughs, and I thought, this is it. I want to, the rest of my life, make people laugh. So that's what happened. It was out of the blue. It was such a good feeling that I was always quiet in high school, junior high, everything like that. I was kind of a nerd. I had friends, but I was not somebody the football player wanted to date, or I wasn't that popular gal, you know. But then when they laughed, I felt approval, and I got more confidence. And so some of the seniors at UCLA approached me after they'd seen me do a couple of shows and said, come sit on the quad and have lunch with us and stuff. So all of a sudden, I became popular. And it was like food, you know, to say, oh gosh, I'm in demand, you know. But the laughter is what did it. Also, you're in the now. You're in the present when that happens. It's like a shot of something. It's like getting high, I guess. I feel that when you get the laughter, you're in the present. You're in the now. It's a total high. A total high when it lands. When it lands and they laugh, oh, it just feels great. Well, I used to sing with Nanny and Mama in the kitchen, but I was kind of quiet. And so I was on campus at UCLA, and Lotfi Mansouri, who was the brilliant director of opera, he was a student. He was ahead of me, and he was in the music department. And he said, there's a musical comedy segment that we do. And he said, can you sing? I said, yeah. He said, would you be one of the nurses in a scene we're doing from South Pacific? I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. I said, yeah, I'd like to try that. So we started rehearsing, and I was so loud they got rid of me. And he said, no, we don't want you in there. Why don't you do a scene with me from Guys and Dolls where you're Adelaide, Miss Adelaide? And I said, oh, sing a solo? I don't think so. And he said, no, it would be great because it's a comedy song and she has a cold when she's singing it. So you don't have to sound really great. You can be sniffling and, all of that. And so that was the first a comedy song I ever sang, and it worked. And then I had my confidence. She sings, a Python can develop a bad, bad cold, and sneezing and all of that. So if I hit a bad note, I would chalk it up to the fact that she had a cold. I was at UCLA, and I was in the opera workshop, musical comedy department, and I remember saying to Nanny, I want to go to New York. I want to go to New York. I want to be on Broadway like Mary Martin or Ethel Merman, so forth. So I'm in the musical comedy workshop, and our professor would grade us on doing scenes. And I was working on a scene from Annie, Get Your Gun. And we were invited, there were 9 of us in the class, to a party in San Diego. Our professor said, and it was in his honor, and his wife, they were going off on a trip to Europe or something. So there was a black tie affair in San Diego, very posh. And he said, all of you kids come down, do your scenes as entertainment for the party. So we did, and I'm at the hors d'oeuvre table after we did our scenes, and I'm stealing hors d'oeuvres to put in my purse to take home to Nanny. And there's a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's this gentleman and his wife, black tie, she's in a gorgeous gown and everything. And he said, we really enjoyed you, and so forth. He said, well, what are your plans? What do you want to do with your life? And this is what I told Nanny before this. I said, I see myself in New York. I don't know how, but I know I'm going to. So this gentleman says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, someday I want to go to New York and be in musical comedy, And he said, well, why aren't you doing that? I said, well, I've got to save up. And he said, I'll lend you the money. And I thought it was a champagne talking, and all. And he said, no, be in my office, gave me his business card a week from Monday, and I'll lend you the money to go to New York. Got down there. He was, at the time, a millionaire, which would be a billionaire today, in the shipping business. And somebody had given him a start. So he's paying it forward. And he wrote out a check for $1,000. Now, as I say, we could barely afford the $30 a month. So that's like, he said, the stipulations are, you use this money to go to New York on. If you are successful, you pay it back to me, no interest, 5 years. You never reveal my name. And if you are successful, you must promise to help others out. So evidently, someone had staked him to a claim. And I found out later that he had helped some young man open a restaurant or a filling station or something. It wasn't just theater. So I went home, and Nanny saw all that money because I cashed it in the bank. And she said, oh my God. She was feeling her pulse and everything. She said, well, look what we can do with that. I said, I have to go to New York. So I quit school after my sophomore year, and my buddies, my school chums, gave me a party, a going-away party, and they said, what are you going to do, Carol? I said, well, here again. I said, well, okay, my first show will be on Broadway, will be a Broadway show directed by George Abbott, who was the director of musical comedy at that time and for years before. Originally, it had been developed by Mary Rogers and Dean Fuller, Marshall Barer, in 1957 at a summer stock place called Tamiment in the Poconos. And it was written for this wonderful comedian, Nancy Walker, who was kind of a brassy, terrific comic, wonderful. And so they developed it, and they finally finished it, and Nancy was committed to do it. And they took it to George Abbott. Now, George Abbott had worked with Nancy in a couple of other Broadway shows, and this was going to be off-Broadway. And he said, let's get all new people. He said, let's find new people to do it. So I had been auditioning for Rodgers and Hammerstein at the time, who were going to take a show down to Florida, Babes in Arms, and I had many callbacks about it, and it looked like I was going to get the part. And then they were going to break it in Florida and bring it back to Broadway. And the director wanted me, but they thought they needed to go with a name, so I didn't get the part. And I was devastated because I thought I had it. And I was raising my kid sister at the time. We were in New York, and I was kind of crying, and she said, Sissy, we always say the old cliche, One door closes, another open. After that sentence, the phone rang. I picked it up, and it was Bill and Jean Eckert, who were producing this little show called Once Upon a Mattress. And she said, could you come down and audition for us? I got on the subway, went down that same day, got home, auditioned, got home, phone was ringing, I got the part, and it was George Abbott. It was, it was off Broadway, so I was getting a big break, I had auditioned a lot before I got my break, and I guess, but I had a good attitude, because sometimes it would be between me and another girl, and she would get it, and I would say, well, it's her turn. It was my turn. My turn will come. So the only time I was really disappointed was when it really was so close with Babes in Arms. Otherwise, if I didn't make it, I said, well, it's not my turn yet. So Mattress was my turn. My first summer stock job was in 1955 at Green Mansions, which was in New York. And the staff was Sheldon Harnick, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, went on to write Fiddler on the Roof. Sheldon Harnick, and then we had Artie Johnson in Tamament, and we had Dean Fuller, who wrote Mattress at Tamament. I did Green Mansions one year, and then Tamament another year. And we had Larry Kurt, who was on Broadway. He created the role in West Side Story. Adams and Strauss, who wrote Bye Bye Birdie, and then Charles Strauss went on to write. So it was quite a wonderful group. And Bernie West, who was a comedian at the time, who went on to write Three's Company. Green Mansions was the toughest, because Sunday night was a variety show. We were off Monday, but we were rehearsing for Tuesday night, which would be play night. Wednesday night was opera night. Thursday night we were off rehearsing for Friday and Saturday, which were original musical reviews. So, and we never really had a full day off for 10 weeks. But we got paid $500 for the whole summer. Gary he had a successful variety show on Tuesday nights live, and Martha Raye had been scheduled to be a guest. Wonderful comedian. But she got sick, and it was a live show, and she had bronchitis. And Gary, they called me on Sunday. They said, could you come and learn the show for Tuesday night? You bet. So I was over there like Roadrunner, and I learned the show, and I brought a sketch with me that I had done at Green Mansions with Bernie West. So we had a sketch that we could perform, but I learned all of her musical numbers and everything. And Gary explained to the audience afterwards that I had just come in, and the audience was so terrific, the studio audience. And I was just crying. I was so happy. And then backstage, I got a phone call from Martha Raye, who was so sweet. And she was croaking, her voice was croaking, and she sent me roses. And I think we became good friends, and she was on my show several times, And so after I did that, they then thought, well, maybe we could. So the following September, they offered me the part of being a regular performer on Gary's show, and I leapt at it. And I preferred it actually to Broadway, because it was like doing a little Broadway show every week, but changing it so that you'd have new challenges and you weren't doing the same thing 8 times a week the way you do on Broadway. I can't really answer. I don't know, except what I really love is when people come up to me and say, we love watching you guys, and it was appointment television where families would be together, and I get mail about that all the time too, and it's terrific. What I'm really happy about too is that since we had our DVDs go out a couple of years ago, and we're on YouTube a lot. I'm getting mail from kids. I mean, young, 10, 11, 12, teenagers, people in their 20s, I've told this, but not long ago, I was doing a Q&A, and I forget where I was, but there was and again, it's random, and a little kid in the second row raised his hand, and I said, "Hi, yeah." He said, well, "I have a question." I said, well, "First of all, what's your name?" He said, "Andrew." And I said, "How old are you, Andrew?" He said, 9. I said, "And you know who I am?" And he said, "Surprisingly, yes." I just loved him. He was so cute. The lowest of lows, of course, was when I lost my daughter, Carrie. You never get over that, but you learn to cope. And she was terrific, and she had a mantra. She was very talented, and she was ill. When she was ill in the hospital for the last time, I was going to see her, and one of the nurses stopped me in the hall. She said, "I have to talk to you about your daughter." I said, "What?" She said, I went into the room the other day. She said, "She is always smiling. She is always up, so forth." And I said, "Carrie, how can you always be so cheerful, lying there like that, And she said, "Every day," this is Carrie's mantra, "every day I wake up and decide, today I'm going to love my life." Decide is the key word. Today I'm going to love my life. This is a quote from Carrie about art. "The legacy is really the lives we touch, the inspiration we give, altering someone's plan, if even for a moment, and getting them to think, rage, or cry, laugh, argue, walk around the block dazed. I do a lot of that after seeing powerful theater. But more than anything, we are remembered for our smiles, the ones we share with our closest and dearest, and the ones we bestow on a total stranger who needed it right then, and God put you there to deliver." That was my girl.